everyone to NEOM House. For those who haven't been here, there's a lot to see, so after this presentation, it kind of fitted in some of the other things that we've got on display. So yeah, my name's Denis Hickey. I'm Chief Development Officer across NEOM. And one of the things I've been looking at in the last couple of years is the line. So I'll give you a bit of an oversight on the line. The first thing to realise is that the line's probably captured the imagination of the world. 2.5 years ago, His Royal Highness came out and did a presentation on the line and held a Nokia in one hand and an iPhone in the other and said, we're trying to revolutionise and rethink about how cities are made. And so we came out, we told the world the vision for that, and it's captivated attention and it's captivated imaginations. What we probably haven't done is explain what the line and the why and what's the thinking behind that and how it all comes together. So I could probably talk for hours on this and I can't, but I'll give you just a little bit of an insight as to why we're doing what we're doing and some of the things and the frameworks for how the line comes together. But what I would ask you to do is to, like anything that's truly innovative, that's truly trying to change the world, you need to think differently than your current paradigms, because we all come from an existing frame of reference. We all live the same way, we all occupy space the same way, and so we mean revert everything back to our current status. What the line does is challenge that. And so I just want to take you on a journey as to why and what we're trying to achieve. We don't have all the answers, but we're working through that. So I'll just flip you through here. And as I said, I'll take some questions a bit later. So I speak all around the world and everyone says to me, can you talk to me about the line? It's the first thing I say is, to understand the line, you really need to understand NEOM. And to understand NEOM, you really need to understand the kingdom. So let's start there. So Saudi Arabia is a fascinating country. It's the 13th biggest landmass country in the world. It has had a very conservative approach for a long period of time. And back in 2015-16, when there was a change in leadership across the country, there was a 2030 vision strategy that was put forward by His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman. And that was really about trying to take Saudi Arabia into the future and open up the doors, engage more with the rest of the world, a lot more bilateral trade, a lot more foreign direct investment, and also improving the lives of the people in the kingdom. So in 2000, the population of Saudi Arabia was 21 million people. Currently, it's just on 33 million people. That's nearly 50-odd% in the space of the time. By 2040, it'll be nearly 45 million people. So as the country opens up, as people come in from tourism, as businesses come in, as it modernises, as people migrate to the region, which is a fascinating part of the world, the kingdom is going on a rapid part of growth. As that happens, and you take a view for 30 or 40 or 50 years, how do you handle that growth? What do you do? Where do they go? Do cities just become bigger? Does Riyadh just become LA? Do we just keep doing the same? So the logic behind that, as part of the 2030 vision strategy, was to open up a new region. And NEOM is a region in Saudi Arabia. And it is a place that is the size of Belgium, size of Massachusetts. It's effectively, in a lot of people's words, it's a state. And so we are creating a new territory, region, state in the kingdom for a 100-year vision plus. And we're starting at a very isolated place, and we're starting at greenfield. So everybody wants to see traction today. It's not an expansion of a city, it's a new place, and it's incredible. So really, as you start to do that, you then say, well, what should this new place be? So when you look at, as I said here, this is where we're located, just for reference. It's located in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia. It's on the mouth of the Suez Canal. The mountains here, for people who have been before, are roughly 2,500 metres. We're currently sitting now at 1,500 metres here at Davos. Our mountains top out at about 2,500 metres. They are big, it snows. It is the coolest part of the Gulf. It is the place to be, and you can see the access into the Suez Canal and straight into the Mediterranean and then straight down into Asia as well. So strategically, geopolitically, climate-wise, it makes a lot of sense. It's a great part of the world. As I said to you before, it is sitting here as a size, roughly the size of Belgium or Massachusetts for people who want to use a US orientation, but it is a state and there's a lot of things happening in that place. If you are going to do that, then you should be thinking about, well, what's the theme for this place? And that's when His Royal Highness was very, very clear on the vision for NEOM. And it really was a vision to become a land of the future. So rather than saying, I'm going to open up a new territory, it's just going to house people like every other city in the world, we'll just let it organically unfold, what he did, he was very clear about developing this vision statement. And this sits on everything we do. Everything we do in terms of sectors, regions, comes back to this statement that says, are we living to the true vision of NEOM? And what we said we wanted to be a land of the future, and we want to be for all people. Not dissimilar than Singapore back in the 30s and 40s. Singapore became a hub for the world. It didn't become a hub for just Singaporean people. It just tried to attract the best talent from around the world. And that's what NEOM is trying to do, is to create a hub that actually pushes the envelope and becomes a land of the future. NEOM is actually an economy. As I said, it's built on foundations of 15 sectors. And so what we're trying to do is build an ecosystem, a population that actually houses people who can drive a united outcome and a united vision according to what I just saw before. These sectors are really what underpin NEOM. And these sectors drive the population growth, drive the business partnerships. We have directors, CEOs, leaders of all of these sectors, and their job is to create their ecosystems and push the envelope. The interesting thing about this is these sectors are not new. They exist in a lot of places and a lot of cities. What we're trying to do, whether it's the media sector, education sector, healthcare sector, what we're trying to do is to say, we want to build a country or a city that actually is at the forefront of each of those sectors. So we're trying to push the envelope. So if you talk to the people who, Dr. Mahmood Yamani, who runs our healthcare division, he's trying to position us as the forefront of healthcare, how we deal with human digital twins. We're doing this now. We're trying to actually be at the forefront of that, along with all of these sectors. And so that's what underpins the drive of what NEOM is all about. In NEOM, then the real estate becomes the enabler for that to happen. And if you look at the outline of NEOM you see here, we have a number of regions. First thing is, His Royal Highness and the board were very, very clear that we've got to create a place that lives in harmony with nature and doesn't consume it. And I'll talk a little bit about that because there's some great examples of that. But so one of the objectives is that 95% of the land here will never be touched and be preserved for nature from today onwards. And so what we're doing is building up that as a safeguard for the population. And we've identified really 6 regions that we focus on at the moment. The best way to think about these 6 regions are you have 4 regions that are really focused on tourism, adventure, resort, hospitality, sustainability, environmental, and they are destination areas. And you have 2 regions that are focused as city creations. So first of all, I'll take you through the 4 regions that are real tourism-based. We have our first, which is Trojena, which is up in the mountains. And I said to you before, this is a place that at the mountains there at about 2,500 metres. It is spectacular, and we were building an all-mountain terrain resort village up there that will house roughly 2,000, 3,000 permanent residents and host thousands of tourism during the year. It's incredible. It has ski fields, it has lakes, it has adventure sports, and it'll be akin to going to the Rockies. During the winter months you can ski, and during the summer months the landscape is very adventurous for all sorts of terrain. You go to Magna, which is down the Aqaba, the Gulf of Aqaba. This spans about 100 kilometres, and it's a series of 12 destinations, and they link together and form a chain, and they kind of form a pathway along the Gulf of Aqaba, and it's a mix of tourism, residential, hospitality, retail, lifestyle, all sits within this chain along the Aqaba coast. We then have our islands. There are 41 islands that sit in NEOM Bay here, and they will be developed, all of them to some of them fully, others will be preserved, but that NEOM Islands is a chain, an archipelago, that really is a remarkable part of the world. The water here and the coral and the seascapes is like no other place. I come from Australia where the Great Barrier Reef is well known around the world. The coral here is probably better. And we're working with UNESCO World Heritage, getting this listed. And as I said, in terms of deep sea diving and adventure sports, etc., the coral here is incredible and the beaches are just crystal sand and blue. And then we have the nature reserve, which takes the rest of NEOM, which is really going to pick up on the heritage of NEOM. And so there's a lot of history. There's the Nepetean Trail that comes down through here, which goes from Alula to Petra. And then there's amazing desert landscapes that we'll go through. Then what happens is you have the two cities. Oxagon is our port industrial city, and that is focused on clean energy, scientific, advanced technologies. We already have a port there. We've expanded that port. It's very active. It does trade. As I said to you before, it's the great landing spot into the kingdom, and that will be a big driver and an ecosystem for NEOM and be an employment base and a housing base as a very innovative industrial city. And then you come to the Line. And the Line is, therefore, the capital city of this region. If we look at the geography, and again, many people haven't been there, so I thought I'd just show you a few pictures. NEOM is really broken into three areas. We have our coastal desert region, we have our mountains region, and then we have our upper valley region. And we broke those into three distinct landscapes. So the coastal desert region, the coastal region, as I said from here, the water here is spectacular and the beaches are incredible. You've probably heard from people who live there and work. The water sports and the water activities are incredible and amazing to participate in. If we go into the mountain district, this is where the big mountains here, is where Trojena is located. And again, the native, the wildlife, all of the things here is just a beautiful part of the world. And then we move into the upper valley, which is where the red desert sits. And again, the landscape here is amazing. So when we've looked at that and we said, if we're going to create a city, where do we create a city? And what do we do? And the best thinking was, rather than creating a city around the sea or around an area, why don't we create a city that spans all three of those regions, which effectively is why the Line came a line, was that the compelling nature of all the topographies, such that if you live on this, you have the ability to access all the landscapes of NEOM. And that was the genesis of why the linear approach came about. So with that, I'll take you more into the Line and some of the things that drive its creation. So as I said, HRH was very, very clear that if we want to be a land of the future and we want to push the envelope, then we need to solve some of the problems that the world is facing. So if you think about it, the largest city in the world in 1850 was London, on 2 million people. There are now over 80 cities in the world that have 9 million people or more. There are 270 that have over 2 million people. What's happened during that phase is that the car was invented and urban sprawl, coupled with industrialisation, saw the birth of modern cities. And they've been great economic engines of growth, but they've spawned off some challenges. And these are the real challenges we see in big major cities. Whilst they're great, they do throw up challenges of logistics. You know, moving around cities. I go to Dubai and I look at it and I think it's fantastic. I think to myself, it's a new city and I already feel like I'm in Los Angeles. You know, and you go, is that the best we can do? And then you look at it and you start to think about what we end up doing with the environment. And a lot of cities consume that nature and they're not planned for growth and they don't think far ahead. So everything's been done incrementally. How do we think about sustainability? How do we think about digital technology? How do we think about health and well-being? You know, in big cities now, one of the biggest problems they have is loneliness. You know, in London, there's a whole loneliness labs and things like this dealing with the disconnection that happens in big cities. And so we wanted to try and say, well, how do we tackle that? And really, as we said, it was the challenges that the city needs to be reinvented. And the model that we all use today, which is based around the vehicle, based around that transport, is not fit for purpose. And so we start with that and say, well, what do we do? So the mission we got given from His Royal Highness is that we had to master plan a city for 9 million people, which is the size of Greater London or the size of New York City. That's a big city. And that's interesting. So we had a master plan for that. Now, Greater London and New York City were never master planned to house 9 million people. They've developed organically and just over a period of time. So that challenge is, are we going to have 9 million people tomorrow? No. Will it take 50 years, 70 years, whatever years? Yes. But the challenge is, let's think about that now. What's the impact of this city when we think about it for 100 years' time? That was the brief. And then we had to hit these criteria. The first thing we had to do was to basically have a city that has no cars. So how do you design a city the size of London or New York City and have no cars? So that's challenging. So it challenges all of the foundations of every other city. How do you create a city that basically is really at one with nature? And I'll talk about this a little bit later. But too many cities, nature is on the confines of the people who get immediate access to it, whether it's around parks or whether it's around the outskirts. The bulk of people who live in cities are a long way from nature. How do we create one where nature is part of the city and in harmony? How do we create one that's 100% sustainable, 100% renewable energy that is not consuming, energy that's harming the environment? And how do we create one that's actually digital, becomes part of the city and a fabric of the city, and it works for us? And it's almost like digital's not a big brother, it's a guardian angel. So how do we start to plan that and make it better for the residents of the city? So it all spawns into a thing called livability. And there is no real definition of livability, and we're trying to actually create this. But again, everything we're doing is trying to pick up on these parameters of what livability is. And we focus on what's the life like when you live in NEOM and you live in the line. How does it feel? What do you experience? How's your health? How's your accessibility, growth, prosperity? Not just economic growth, but just intellectual growth, curious growth, access to education, all of the things we come back into the brand of livability. So we created the line, which was really unique in 3 ways. Firstly, it's linear. Secondly, it's vertical. And the outcome is it becomes very vibrant. It's a high-density city. So let's just go through each one of those. So it's vertical. It's a linear city, and there's an outline of London. It shows you a traditional circular city. Most cities have developed like this, and most cities have developed over time, and they sprawl, and they kind of try to piece together the infrastructure over a period of time. Actually, a linear city is not a new concept. It was actually first invented in the late 1800s by a Spanish architect who came up with the concept that if you can create a linear city, you can leverage infrastructure and you can actually speed up connection. And so there was a lot of work and academic research done at the time, but then along comes the motor vehicle in the early 1900s. That dies, the concept of a linear city dies, the technology wasn't there, and so therefore it kind of went dormant. We've really picked that up, and we've picked up the concept of a linear city and said, actually, it's got a lot of benefits, which I'll take you through. The best way to think about a linear city, I think, is Manhattan, of a modern linear city. I've lived in Manhattan for the last 12 years. I love Manhattan. It's an incredible place. I don't own a car. It's one of these cities. It is 22 kilometres long and 3 kilometres wide. It houses roughly 1.8 to 1.9 million people live on that island. Another pre-COVID, 2 to 3 million people would come to work every day, and another million odd were tourists. So it was a hive of activity, and it functions fairly well for people who've gone there and had a look. The grid system is the backbone of that. The grid system, the transport system has enabled that city to become what it is. And so when you think about that, not many people will know, is that the grid in Manhattan was first created in 1811 under Governor Peter Stuyvesant, commissioned the island. They were only down around Battery Park, and basically he commissioned the master plan. So it took 200 years to build that city, but you can see the power of a master plan for a city that if you get that framework right, the city can grow faster and become more sustainable in its original objectives. So that's really what we're saying is we think that linear city and the master plan approach is something that the line is really anchored in. The second thing is it becomes a vertical city. And you staying on the Manhattan analogy here, as I said to you before, Manhattan's 3 kilometres wide, The line is 1.2 kilometres wide. The only difference is we fold it up. So we take the grid of Manhattan, and I'll explain the grid to you in a minute, but effectively we fold that up. What you see here is the blue lines are the avenues. For those people who've been in Manhattan, 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue, 7th Avenue, those avenues get folded up into the air. The red are the streets, and we form a grid. So the line is effectively two structures that fold up and look at each other. They look into each other. The line is not a building. It is a city, and it's a city framework. And so, as I said, you pick up the grid structure of Manhattan. And what that means is when you get into the line, you will have 5th Avenue at ground level, 6th Avenue at 150 metres in the air, 7th Avenue at 250, 8th Avenue at 350, and so forth. Those avenues are what we call primary decks. Inside those primary decks, to give you a sense of space, I think this must be, 2.7 high. The primary deck is 16 metres thick. 16 metres. Inside that primary deck, we house all our transport, infrastructure, and everything sits in that primary deck. On top of that primary deck is effectively a boulevard, and they sit either side. And those boulevards run for kilometres long, and they're roughly 50 metres wide. And so those boulevards carry the transport, and we'll talk about the logistics. But you move along the blue corridors in the city. They become big boulevards. And you use your vertical rapid transportation that kind of sits in as the red. So you will move around the line in the same grid structure you move around New York City. You will be able to say, I want to go to this point, to that point on the northern side or the western side, and there'll be a whole geospatial map, but effectively it is a grid structure. Another way to think about it is think about it as a bookcase, pigeonholes. What we're doing is we're creating a pigeonhole bookcase, and then the real estate sits in around that bookcase. But there's a framework, we call it the chassis. That's what you basically see. Two structures that look inside and form a canyon in the middle. What that enables us to do is to create a very vibrant city. Again, stay on the Manhattan side. If you're living on the east side of Manhattan and want to go to Madison Square Garden, it's roughly a, 2-kilometre walk. By the time we fold that up, you've now created a third dimension because you can actually access things both horizontally, vertically, and crosswise. So your travel times are exponentially improved and your connectivity is exponentially improved. And it's almost like a bit like a black hole that you've seen, Inception or whatever, when they fold the paper, put the pen through. What we're doing is we're creating a different dimension around connectivity. What that means is there's vibrancy that sits in this city. And I'll show you some of the pictures a little bit later on, some of the renderings. And it means that basically it's anchored in things like a 5-minute walk, that you can get all your daily needs within 5 minutes. So the outcome of that is, you can see the size here, that's Greater London, that's the line, and the outcome in terms of impact on the land and impact on the environment is very different. We're using less than 10% of the land than you do in traditional cities. So we're actually, by taking it vertical, we're taking the strain away from the infrastructure on the land. What that also enables you to do is to connect with the land. So if we go back to that Manhattan thing I said before, I love Manhattan, it's fantastic, it's a great grid system. But to build Manhattan, they had to kill every bit of vegetation on that island and then replace it in with a park. What we're doing is by building the line, we're actually creating a city inside a park as opposed to a city with a park, because the park is actually sit at the base and the landscapes sit at the base and it's accessible by everybody. When you live in the line, you'll be able to come down anytime you want to, no different than any high-rise building in the world. You'll come down and hit the landscapes and be able to use that. So living in the line is as much about the outdoors and the landscapes and the connectivity as it is about the structure that you live in. How the line is put together, it's built in phases and modules. Roughly, the height of the line is 500 metres above sea level. And that stays constant as it rises into the mountains and comes out at the top of the mountains. What that means is the structure itself gets smaller as we move in, but the height stays perfectly at 500 metres of sea level. What we do is we build it in modules. And the creation of a module and the framework, the chassis I spoke to you before, enables a enables us to replicate it. And therefore we get some economies of scale and we basically drive some efficiencies, as opposed to a normal city that basically is always reinventing itself and having to reinvent and put in new infrastructure. Our ability to leverage that infrastructure is heightened by the line. The marina is where we're basically starting, in the hidden marina. That is our phase one. There were talks about, the lines getting smaller. It used to be, a big line, now it's a dash. It was always going to be built in phases and stages. No one ever anticipated you're building a city for 9 million people in one hit. So we are building this, and this is effectively an aerial of what it looks like over the top of the line. Comes down into a hidden marina, and this is where we're starting. We're building a hidden harbour that comes in. Around that harbour, which will be marine base, we'll have roughly 4 million square metres of space that will actually formed and part of the landscapes, and they'll be at the gardens of the line. The first phase is going to consist of 3 modules. Roughly that will be about 21 to 22 million square metres inside the line. Put that in perspective, the Burj Khalifa has a GFA roughly of about 350,000 square metres. We're going to be 21 million. So it is enormous. It will house somewhere between 200 to 250,000 people this first phase. So we are building a city, and it will be full of everything. It's full of schools, places of worship, fire stations, justice system courts. It's full of retail, commercial, residential. It's got hospitals, it's got universities. It is a full-blown city. And so it's an incredible initiative. Again, to put that into perspective, staying on the Manhattan, each module, the distance between Columbus Circle and Fifth Avenue in New York City is 900 metres. So anybody who's gone to Central Park South, walk that, that's 900 metres. One module is 800 metres long, so it's almost the distance of the Central Park South. And it's 500 high. In my prior life, I built this building here, which is called One Central Park, and it's 470 metres high. We're going to be 500 metres high. And effectively what we're doing, as I said to you before, is we build 2 structures side by side. They look into each other and form a canyon. And so the glass becomes almost the city walls, and the city sits inside the glass. If you then outlay that, the 3 modules effectively take you from the Arc de Triomphe into the start of the Louvre in terms of size. It is enormous. By any stretch of the imagination, this is the most audacious, ambitious thing that's ever been done. And it's incredible, and we're underway. We're into construction. The line will have a series of anchor assets like all cities, and again, I could provide a lot more information, but I don't want to bore everybody. But we built the city around having anchor assets, no different than when you go to Paris and you have the Arc de Triomphe, or you have the Louvre as an anchor asset, or if you go to London, or if you go to New York City, you've got the Met Museum. We have the city anchored with these large-scale anchor assets and city-making, place-making assets. For example, it's been very public. The line and NEOM have been selected as part of the 2034 FIFA Games. We will be building a stadium here that starts at level 350 in the air. That is the height of the Empire State Building, is where the playing pitch will be. And this stadium will be like nothing you have ever seen. It'll hold 45,000 people, and it will be incredible. And we're well into design, and everyone says, can you build it? Absolutely, we can build it, and we will build it. To put into some sort of scale, we're building things like arenas here. Our arena here will be roughly the size of Madison Square Garden from the get-go. So these are big anchor assets that will anchor the city and give place and purpose. As I said, we're not building a building, we're building a city. Put that into context, again, just overlay some global assets onto that. The first thing that probably jumps out here is the Eiffel Tower. So our chandelier that sits under the stadium is roughly 2/3 the size of the Eiffel Tower. We're just going to be bringing it down as opposed to bringing it up as our centre point of the city. You can see, Tower Bridge there that sits in our gate and the size of that, and the gate is enormous. The gate here is the width of the Thames, to put that in perspective. I think we get lost when we look at the line and try to explain it to people. They get lost in the dimensions. And as I said to you, if I leave you with nothing, this is an incredible initiative, and it's been like nothing that's ever been done before, and it is of huge scale. One of the things you need if you're going to take away cars, probably the last point I'll leave you with and then go to some questions, is mobility. So if you are going to try and build a framework for a city that has no cars, then you need to have the world's best mobility system from the get-go. And so I'll just take you through how this works. So there are currently 6 layers of mobility through the line. We start off with high-speed rail, general mass transit, vertical, elevated, and go through. I'll take you through each one of these. So what we end up with our high-speed rail. The high-speed rail station sits under here, buried underground. It's like Grand Central Station. It's a big terminal. This is our central terminal that feeds the city, and that connects up into the airports. That will connect up to NEOM International Airport and to NEOM Bay Airport, as also as our freight lines. But that becomes the high-speed rail, and you will be able to get, when finished, from here to NEOM International Airport within 25 minutes under the high speed. That's the high-speed connector, not dissimilar to other high-speed rail that you'll see around the world. Overlaying that, we put what's called a GMT, General Mass Transit. Again, they run beside the line, not under the line, they run beside it. And these stations are roughly every 1.5 kilometres to 2 kilometres. And they become your general mass transit. So if you want to go somewhere, you will drop down, get to a GMT, and go to whatever station you need to go to along the line. And that becomes the second mode of transport. The third mode of transport is our rapid vertical transportation. These are not elevators, these are rapid transportation. These are massive cores that house massive goods and people mobility. They only stop at the primary decks, which I'll tell in a minute. One talks about, well, how can you go 500 metres? They're effectively taking you to the corners of each grid. And we've done all the modelling, and the time to move up and through the city still meets our 5-minute walk criteria. So the mobility and access and the network of all of this actually kind of comes together and stands up on all the modelling. We then have what's called our horizontal mobility. I talked before, this is about our primary deck. In this yellow line, you've got to think about inside all of that is all of your infrastructure. So in there will be light rail, and it won't be a heavy rail, it'll be done by magnet and all different types of things, but it is a loop system that loops around at height. So if you want to go somewhere, you literally walk to this deck, there's a train station, and you catch that light rail across and get off at any point, and they stop every 150 metres. It's just a light rail stop. That loops around, goes around in a circle. At this deck, all of the decks, they have a loop system. So you've got all sideways mobility inside the line, inside all of these primary decks. On top of the primary deck is the boulevard, where all the public transportation, micro-mobility and everything works. We then add that micro-mobility that really sits on top. And as you can see here, we create bus lanes, pedestrian lanes, walk lanes, mixed with retail, mixed with residential, mixed with everything. And it becomes like any city boulevard, and it'll have landscapes, etc. that come through. And then finally, you have pedestrian. And then we've got pedestrian access. So it basically also goes crossways and through the city in terms of linking up both sideways and in between the primary decks. So all of those come together to form a network of mobility that has basically never been seen before in terms of this. If you looked at this as a grid and looked down at Manhattan, you would instinctively get this. And you'd say, absolutely, I get how this works. You've got, here's my Broadway, I can walk through that. Here's my streets, here's my subway. I get all of that. All we're doing is just putting it up in the air. And what happens is the minute we put it up in the air, everyone gets disorientated and says, well, that really doesn't work, but it does. It's actually a very logical and a very sane thing to do. So I'll just flip you through some of the CGIs. These are early CGIs, and what we haven't done, you've seen a sneak peek here, we haven't really released a lot of this information to the world. We will plan to do this in the next few months, but we want to basically be able to communicate that and educate the people in the world of what the line will be and why, and it'll have a lot more information than what I've presented today. But looking at some of the CGIs, you'll see the gate. This is massive. That's 350 metres in the air. That's the height of the Shard in London. And you can see the two canyons. The distance in here is roughly 100, 120 metres between the two, which is longer than a soccer pitch. So you think about it, you're sitting at one end of the soccer field, looking to the other end of the soccer field is the gap between that forms the canyon inside the line. And you'll see these things we call strings and sticks. And again, these are probably early CGIs, and we're working on more as the design of the assets develop. We have these for the 3D goggles that we have at the back. And the best way, it's really hard, we show static pictures. The best way to understand the line is you've got to feel the line and you've got to feel the space. So if you've got time, put the 3Ds on. It's a beta, it's very early. We are working on a next layer of CGIs that enable people to get full immersion inside the line and be able to walk around inside the line. But basically, that's what we have a look at here. So that's, again, probably a lot of things. Just recap, the line is incredibly innovative. It challenges all of your norms. And it challenged my norm when I first came here, I can tell you. The first thing you think about is, well, that's crazy, that can't happen. Why are we doing this? Which is a great question. Why are you doing it? Which comes back to what His Royal Highness wants to do, which is to create a new way for cities to evolve, because we've been using the same model for thousands of years. And is there a new way? And there's no doubt that we will learn from what we're doing here, and that will be a learning think test for the rest of the world. And we're underway. We've done a lot of construction. We're pouring the foundations as we speak. Our timeline is pretty aggressive, but it is real, and it's an incredible place. And I look forward to sharing more information with you as we start to release it to the market. But I just wanted to give you some of the framework for today. So happy to open up for some questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dennis.
If you could just raise your hand if you have a question, and because I know there's going to be a huge amount, if we can just get very quickly onto the question.
Thank you. Terrific presentation, really, really enjoyable. I'm just trying to visualize, you were using the example of 6th Avenue and maybe, let's say, Madison, folding them up.
Yep.
So you have all these buildings standing where you have views on both sides all the way up. All those views are gone, right, when you go sideways. What am I missing?
Yeah, so what you're missing is the fact that it's not a wall of buildings. So what you end up with is we have, for anybody who's in construction sense, we have what's called our cores that form the vertical structure. Inside the cores have a lot of your services, transport. Around those cores, you bring your assets. Those cores sit every 114 metres spaced, core to core. Within there, you get massive gaps. So effectively, you've got a cube of light. So you're effectively from one primary deck to another primary deck, take the 16 metres out, you're 84 metres. And then you're 50 metres between these assets. So you have massive light coming in from the side of the glass and in the city. So people think it's not a shopping mall, right? And the glass will be permeable, so it will open and you'll breathe. The city's a breathable city. It's not an air-conditioned, enclosed space. It will be livable, breathable. But basically, all of that light will come streaming in. And then what you end up with is, effectively, you'll end up from glass to glass is 200 metres. If you went to something like Times Square or Piccadilly Circus, they are smaller than the space we'll be recreating inside of this. So the public spaces are enormous, but people instinctively think it's not. But you'll get a lot of light in there, okay?
Dennis, a lot of people, very challenging climate and a lot of glass typically adds up to a lot of energy being consumed. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Consumed in the operation or consumed in the construction?
Post-construction, right? And the glass usually, if you have to cool it, heating, all sorts of things.
Yeah, no, the city is not air-conditioned or done anything, so the glass is there more as a shield. I mean, it is a harsh climate, in summer, getting that protection. I mean, humans have always intervened in the natural environment, whether it's Eskimos or whether it's in the desert. Humans come in and intervene and create shade and create an environment that kind of brings the temperature back into our zone. That's what the glass is really trying to do, is to create an environment. The environment inside of the line will be no different than outside of the line. They're huge. There are 2 million square metres of public open space in the first 3 modules. It's massive, right? So there's parks and gardens and soccer fields and pitches, and so it'll be hive of activity. The glass is not an energy consumer. There is an opportunity to use the glass as a form of solar capture and to provide energy. Technology's not there yet. It can be done, but what it means is you can't look through the glass to do that, and so we want to make sure we have the mix. But the glass is, as I said, is more as a protection than a consumer of energy.
Anyone else with a question?
Sorry, I was just wondering how the policing would work within the line and like the safety aspects of it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we spend a lot on this, and we have public safety. So we have safety and security strategies. We have fire life safety strategies. Just come back to that. So fire life safety, people say, well, what would happen? You know, how will people get out? The reality is you go sideways. So it's not about going up and down. You move sideways. The city moves sideways. And so we've done all of the modelling, the evacuation. FIFA, in terms of anointing this from a stadium, had to deal with public safety, security, fire life safety, and had to get comfort with all of this. So it all works. It just works in a different framework than we're used to. As far as safety, we'll have our own police force. We'll have private security. It'll be no different than any other city. So it'll be interesting.
As you mentioned, I know the one in New York has faced some backlash being on Billionaires Row. I was wondering, how would you maybe like counter these claims as this, like, to people who think this might be an activity for the elitist community, or how would you ensure affordability for or access to multiple different communities?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because this is designed to be very much a distributed. It's not a pitched at the elite at all. Basically, what we have built in affordable housing structures, essential working housing structures into this that not dissimilar to London, New York. There'll be essential worker housing spread through this. We're also making sure that the price points cater for all of the income brackets of how people will live. The interesting thing is that it's a bit of a dichotomy because we're building the first phase of the line over the world's biggest man-made marina, and it's incredible. And it's the centre, it's the CBD. So if you start to think about it with the future modules coming, the CBD is not the logical point where you put affordable housing. So we're working through how does that city evolve over time. But yes, it's designed to be catered for the whole mix of income distribution. And what it does is it actually gives everybody the same access. So Billionaires Row, if I can't live on Billionaires Row, I'm living somewhere down in Tribeca, somewhere I don't get the same access. Everybody has the same access to views here. Everybody has the same access to nature. Everyone has the same access to the city. So it's much more unified in terms of accessibility and distribution of activity than any other city. I live right near Central Park. I love it. I'm in Central Park every day. You know, we walk the dogs and that sort of stuff. If you don't live near Central Park, you don't get that. Here, you are going to get that. And so that's one thing that, again, people probably we haven't communicated that as well, but that's an outcome of living here.
Dennis, thanks a lot for the presentation. I have a pretty much conceptual question. So how does the project, let's say, interfere in terms of the general market economy principle? So I'll explain. So for example, in a normal world, right, you give up, for example, a piece of land and say, okay, here's your construction permit, go ahead and build something, right? Here, basically, you are doing that for certain, let's say, scope or number of private persons. So I'm pretty much concerned in terms of whether you can give too much freedom in terms of like building a football pitch, for example, right? So you have to design it from scratch at the beginning. So to which extent, basically, there is certain freedom of the private persons to get involved into the whole project in terms of construction and operation?
Yeah, no, really good question. What we're doing is a couple of things. Is the city's design, because we use the grid structure on the primary decks, they're effectively terra firma. So you're building between primary decks. So your structures are only really 80 odd metres. So it's not like 500 metre structures. So they're designed to be able to be replaced and renewed as the city evolves. So you can actually do that and renew that and modernise the city as we go. Change uses. So we're making sure that the uses can move from residential to commercial through to schools, etc. So building flexibility in their master plan design. The thing that because this has never been built before, the kingdom is really taking the responsibility of bankrolling and delivering this. The objective is the fact that it will be monetisable and flexible enough in the next modules that will bring in the private sector, and the private sector will be able to come and do that. Just for example, here on the first 3 modules, we break it into neighbourhoods, and that's how it's come. Each neighbourhood's roughly 400,000 square metres. We've got 28 neighbourhoods by the time you take the marina. We will have something like 75 different architects. We're a global architect firm. So it is diverse. It is incredibly diverse. And it's designed to be able to do that each architect can come in and put their expression, not dissimilar than, you hate to go back to the Manhattan or the London, each pocket will have its own feel. It's not going to be homogenous through. You're actually going to have an architectural and a different feel through the city as it evolves.
So basically building some cells and then you have freedom inside.
Correct, yeah. So you've got the mirror glass, which is the walls to the city. We're building the infrastructure, being the chassis, which is the grid, and then the assets sit within that grid structure, and that gives the flexibility. Now, how we do that, what is the size of that? We're working through that, and we'll develop those mechanisms and the economics and the logistics around that over the time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. I think we've got time for one more question. So do we have a question from the back of the room?
Good.
Thank you, Dennis. It's fascinating presentation. So you mentioned there would be no air conditioning per se on the street level. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because generally glass creates this glass house effect, making it even warmer. How do you combat this?
Yeah, so the glass is coated and it'll have a mirror facade, so it reflects, and basically a lot of the heat will be pushed away through that. We do a lot of microclimate. So we've got to make sure the plants survive, or the temperature survives. You've got the ecology system inside the line survives and flourishes. The glass is breathable, so it opens, and basically you get air through the city. What we will do is we will pump air through the primary deck, and we'll be able to draw air from outside and get air movement. But it's not air conditioned, so we're not looking to put refrigerated through the common areas and the common space. But the glass won't act as a magnifier or a heat driver inside the line. So we've tested that. We've had the world's best people. We've gone into labs. We've built mock-ups. You can imagine the extent of the things we're doing. We're making some really big decisions here, and decisions on glass and decisions on space and decisions on logistics that are really irreversible. So, the amount of scrutiny, and the board put us under huge scrutiny to make sure that we've got the right global best practice advice and so forth. So that's how we deal with it. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you very much.